say your taste buds dull as you age, so maybe that's why. I was talking about maybe. I was talking about maybe my taste buds will be able to handle black coffee for too long. What's that? Oh yeah. I got lots of practice teaching 5th grade. You tell them something they don't get, and you're like, you just kinda... No. Okay. This is probably one of those teachings where you're probably going to be like, he's out of his mind. Oh, I guess I hadn't turned it on. Oops. Hello? Better? Okay. Yeah, okay, repeat that. Y'all heard the joke, though, so it must have been loud enough. This is probably one of those lessons where you look at the title and you go, okay, he's out of his mind. What's he been watching, reading, looking at? It's a little crazy. Talking about a red heifer, but it's biblical. I tell Shelly all the time, like, you got to listen to me. It's biblical. That's what it says. No, but I say that in a joking manner. Heather asked me if this was about her. I guess since it rhymes with Heather, I said no. I said I can make it if you would like. The red heifer. This is. I was on, the series about Jerusalem and the Temple Mount structure and everything, and this bridges. It's kind of funny because we're going to be talking about a bridge, but this bridges those two and some future ones. If you get this and understand why this is important, it makes everything else. You realize even more of what's needed, what's required, and when you see things, you can say, "Oh, we're close." I do have a picture of a red heifer, the most recent red heifer that could be the qualifying red heifer for future temple use. We don't know if it will be the one, but you might actually get a picture of the one. You never know. We're going to talk about the red heifer. But first, let's talk about your head. How many hairs are on your head? Oh, does anybody know? If somebody knows, that's 0.
He knew.
Oh, better yet, okay. Oh, stump. Anybody want to throw out a guess? Nobody?
I'll start the bidding off at 100. I want to get this cheap, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
280,000.
Well, you're overshooting it a little bit there, but you're born with about 100,000 hair follicles. Typical head in here, without balding, is probably looking about 150,000, 175,000 hairs on your head. Isn't that wild when the Bible tells us that He knows every hair on your head? Not a hair on your head will be harmed. 175,000 could be on your head. Now, multiply that by however many times your head would cover a cow. That's how many hairs have to be inspected to see if it works. We're going to talk about that. And then another thing I'll get you all involved in, when you see something about defilement in the Bible, especially reading through the Old Testament, that they defiled it, what do you think of when you think of defilement? What made something unclean? And we don't have to go through all 600. Disease.
Discoloration.
Death. Leprosy. Marriage relations technically made people unclean. The birth process made someone unclean. The monthly cycle made someone unclean. Lots of different things would make you unclean, and you would have to go through some sort of ritual purification, whether it's 7 days, 40 days, 8 days, whatever the thing was. There was always a way to cover it. And what I want you to get out of all this, we're going to talk about the history and look toward the future, but I don't ever want to leave out the importance. Christ is in it. He is in everything that we should be teaching. He should be there. And there is a spiritual lesson in this. So don't rule that out. As you hear these things being thrown out there, listen and use what you hear for your own spiritual application. Kind of like what I've done in this. But there's a lot about this. It goes deep. I mean very, very deep. I looked on the Temple Institute website, and it was page after page after page after page after page of information concerning the red heifer. One sacrifice, actually more like a slaughter than a sacrifice, but so much went into it. And when you look at just one, you can see all that went into Christ's shedding His blood for us, all that went into it, the fulfilling of every single law and every single rule that God laid out. He fulfilled it all to the letter. And you will begin, as you study, you kind of begin to see that. But first, let's pull up a picture here. The very first one. This is, what'd Ben do with it? Oh, there it is. I don't think we'll need to dim the lights. There's no words or anything. I have shown, weirdly enough, this is in Arizona. Not really sure why that this is in Arizona, but it is, and we're going to talk about something that's in West Virginia. So America's got a lot to do with tonight. This is a model in Arizona. You can see the old walls. This is the old city of Jerusalem. You've got the Temple Mount right here. But most models that you ever see, you will never see this right here. It's not in the model in Jerusalem. It's very rarely included in pictures. Not a lot of people know about it. Not a lot of people realize what it was. It's not really, they don't see the importance of it, really. You will see that it goes to the, what gate is that? Anybody know what gate that is right there? That is the Eastern Gate. That's the things I want you to remember as I show you these pictures. We're going to move forward into the building of the third temple. It goes all the way across the Kidron Valley and lands on the Mount of Olives. I used to think that this was, and I have learned a lot by going back and restudying this. I used to think this was for the highfalutin priests who were too good to be down below with the people, but that is not. Now, they probably were highfalutin and were better than everybody, but that's not why it is. There's even a place, go to the next one there. You will see that it is supported by what? Arches. Why would you build something with an arch? It's the strongest support there is because it is supported by what? Gravity. The more you push on it, the stronger it gets. It's like an eggshell. If you put the same amount of pressure on an egg all the way around it, it's built in such a way it won't crack. The arch is the strongest type of building material. I had to build one for one of my classes one time, and it was nowhere near as good as what Lisa would have built. But it was out of styrofoam, and you would just, the centerpiece. You would pull the centerpiece out, and the entire thing would collapse. Gravity holds it together. When you look at it, you think, well, that's why they built it that way, but it's really not. You'll see that each arch comes down in the middle of another arch, in the middle of the arch below it. Nothing was connected, and that is important. This is the painstaking details they go to do all that. You'll see the temple there facing east, and right here you can see what? It's a square. God doesn't deal with circular what? Altars. It's always a square. There's a square up there. Okay, you can go to the next one. You'll see the altar there. Square altar. You'll see the red heifer. We'll talk about everything that they're using in it here in just a minute, but you can also see the arches again and the temple over there. Had to be a line of sight straight into the Holy of Holies. Had to be. And that will play an important role in future lessons. Now let's go one more. There she is. This is the current one. So we'll leave that up for now. Let's look at Numbers 19. Numbers 19. What would be strange? Now this is the only place that this is found. What is strange about it being in Numbers? When you think about Numbers, what don't you typically think of? That you would think of in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. The law, the sacrifices, things like that. It's kind of an odd place to stick this event. Right before it, you've got Korah's rebellion. How many people died in Korah's rebellion? I don't remember right off the top of my head. That's why I'm asking you. But it was thousands. Thousands died. And when you read in Numbers 18, or is it 17? Actually 16. There was also a plague at that time, and there were 14,700 more people that died, in addition to all those that died at Korah's rebellion. So what do you have here? Lots of what? Dead bodies everywhere. Thousands upon thousands of dead bodies laying everywhere. And you'll see that several times in the Bible, God would come in and, the angel of the Lord would come in and just kill thousands and lay them out. There was death everywhere. And I think that's one of the reasons that he puts this in where he does. It's not found in Leviticus. It's not found in Deuteronomy. It's not found in the givings, the public givings of the law. But he goes in here, and in chapter 19, Numbers 19, there is a book called Numbers, and there is a chapter 19. So making sure we're on the right track there. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron. Now I'm reading out of the NIV tonight. It reads a little easier. This is a requirement of the law that the Lord has commanded. This is the first time they would have heard of this. Tell the Israelites to bring you a red heifer without defect or blemish, that has never been under a yoke. Give it to Eleazar the priest, and is to be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Then Eleazar the priest is to take some of the blood on his fingers and sprinkle it 7 times towards the front of the tent of meeting. Do you care to go back one slide, David? What would happen? Is Eleazar the high priest here? Who's the high priest in this day?
Eleazar.
Be Aaron. Aaron, correct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand it.
Aaron would be the high priest, correct?
Yeah,
He had someone helping him.
Yes, in the number of days. Yes.
He had someone helping him. So, basically this would be Aaron, and this would be Eleazar. Eleazar, but this is in the temple. You got to kind of move it back to the tabernacle. He would take that blood. He would actually take it in his right hand, and with his left hand sprinkle it 7 times towards the entrance of, in their day, the tabernacle. In Jesus' day, it would have been the temple. Okay, it's got to go toward the temple area, the sprinkling of the blood. So I just kind of want to show you what's happening as we go. Let's see here. While he watches, the heifer is to be burned. Its hide, its flesh, its blood, its dung, everything is to be burned. Is that normal? No. Normally there were different pieces. Normally on the sacrifices, the Levites would take parts. That's what happened to Eli's sons. They were picking the choice parts instead of what?
Just to set the stage, you are showing a picture of the temple, but we're talking about the tabernacle.
Right. Okay, let me clarify that. It's the same concept. This is just in Jerusalem, and where they're at would be out in the wilderness.
Yes.
They're looking at the mobile temple, the one that you can get up, move around, pack up, load up. This is the permanent structure, but it would still be the same aspect. I don't think I could find a picture of the actual red heifer sacrifice in the tabernacle days. But same concept, the same actions applied. He would take it and he would sprinkle the blood toward the door. Had to be toward the door, facing the Temple Mount or facing the tabernacle, whichever that you're reading about. That's where they got their law there. While he watches, the heifer is to be burned, its hide, its flesh, its blood, its dung. The priest is to take some cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool and throw them onto the burning altar. Does that catch anybody's attention there? Think about Christ's sacrifice for just a minute. And now he was not female, that we know. But this is an offering that is offered where? Outside the camp. Most are offered where? Inside. Most are offered inside at the temple. This one is outside. The wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet. What was placed on Christ? The scarlet robe. What was used to try to dull the sensation? The hyssop. You've also got the wood. I have read some say that it could have been cedar wood. I don't know. A lot of times they would even just throw up a plank on an olive tree. Just throw up a plank. It wasn't a pretty cross. It wasn't like what we have. It was gnarled and old and really an old rugged cross. It wasn't nice and symmetrical probably. It was a torture instrument, and it didn't have to look pretty. Moving on here. And throw them onto the burning heifer. After that, the priest must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. He then must come into the camp, but he will be ceremonially unclean until evening. The man who burns it must also wash his clothes and bathe with water. He too will be unclean until evening. This is a strange, and it's hard for even the Jewish experts to understand this. Normally, you clean yourself up to sacrifice, and that's what they did. But once they did this one, they were unclean until evening. But moving on, a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and put them in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp. They shall be kept by the Israelite community for use in the water of cleansing. Okay? They would burn the entire beast, and they would store its ashes in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp to be used with the water of cleansing. This sounds like, this is deep, and they paid attention to this stuff. Where are we at here? The man who gathers up, it is for purification from sin. It is a sin offering. The man who gathers up the ashes of the heifer must also wash his clothes, and he too will be unclean till evening. This will be a lasting ordinance for both the Israelites and the strangers or the aliens living among them. Okay? Not aliens from outer space. Alien, just someone foreign coming in and living in and among the people. Now, if this is to be a lasting ordinance, what would we think there needs to be a lot of? Red heifers. But that's not the case. They're pretty rare. Has anybody ever seen one? I can't recall ever seeing one. Larry?
Well, limousine are red, but it's a different kind of red, I guess. I don't know. But they're usually all red.
All red?
Mm-hmm.
This is a big animal. Probably 4,000 pounds, give or take. There's a lot of ash. Lots of ash that would be here for all this. So the ashes would last a long time. A long time. There has been recorded in the Mishnah, the oral Jewish tradition, 9 red heifer sacrifices from this very first one in the book of Numbers until the temple was destroyed in AD 70. 9. Jewish tradition also says that the 10th one will usher in the Messianic era. What I'm telling you is lots of things were lost. We lost lots of things in AD 70. There's some wild theories out there that people know where the ashes of the red heifer could be located. Does anybody know they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1948. Ironically, the year Israel became a nation. They found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in there they found, you know what it is? The scroll they couldn't unroll?
No.
It was the copper scroll. They could not unroll it. And these people began to digitally, recently going in and reading it without opening it. It's the wildest thing. They would go in, they would just read it, they would look for imprints or impressions where the pen wrote, and they could read this scroll without ever opening it, supposedly having the locations of different things throughout the Holy Land. Some say that they know where the remaining ashes of the red heifer are. I'm not going to go that route. I just wanted you to be aware of that. I think there is a red heifer coming. And you say, why? What's the importance of all this stuff? Why do we have to have a red heifer? Well, let's read on here. In verse 11, this is why he puts this in right here. We've got thousands of dead bodies laying around the camp. The plague has come through. God took care of Korah and his crew. There's dead people, death everywhere. And yet, of course, and people die every day. When you come in contact with death, something so natural and something so, it's our curse. But God still says death is the opposite of everything I am.
That's right.
And it is still, when you are in contact with death, you are defiled. You are unclean. Period. And he says, whoever touches the dead body will be unclean for 7 days. Now, how do you bury someone? You got to touch them. You got to touch them. He must purify himself with water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and 7th days, he will not be clean. When they would get ready to do this sacrifice, they would cleanse him every day for 7 days before the sacrifice, because they didn't want to miss the 3rd day or the 7th day, depending on the last time he touched anything dead. So they covered it. They covered all their bases. For the entire 7 days before this took place, they sprinkled him with the ashes. They made sure he was pure. Okay? Whoever touches the dead body of anyone and fails to purify himself defiles what? The Lord's tabernacle. In the future tense, in Jesus' day, the temple, the dwelling place of God. You did not want to go into the Holy of Holies being defiled. It was not good. So, let's see here. That person must be cut off from Israel because the water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on him. He is unclean, and his uncleanness remains on him. So, let's backtrack here. They go and they sacrifice this bull, or this heifer. They take all the ashes of the burnt offering and they store them somewhere. And they go get the water and they sprinkle it. Now, the water came from the pool of Siloam. Always came from the pool of Siloam. Now, they would mix that. I'm telling you, it gets deep. Now, I want you to understand this. Even the person that fetched the water had to be clean. So how do you ensure that these people stay clean and are clean? Remember how I said it was kept outside? They had what was called like a little commune. They call them kibbutzes now in Israel. If you've been to Israel, you've been to a kibbutz probably. It's like a little area run. It's like a communist-run thing. Everybody owns everything and everybody works everything. These arches are there for a reason, not just structure. There had to be a certain gap between the ground and a dead body for even the ground not to contaminate a Jewish priest. So these people would go off into this place and live, and they would find basically a threshing floor, a place of bare bedrock. Okay, they wanted bedrock because they were sure that no one had ever been buried underneath it. For instance, if a priest walked over a grave, defiled. There had to be a pocket of air between it, a hand's breadth, 10 centimeters or so. So these people would build their house on top of this bedrock, and they would leave a pocket, basically of air, 10 feet or 10 centimeters above the ground. So even that walking through the house, they would not accidentally become defiled walking over what could have been a dead body. I mean, this is how, and they would raise kids in this, and the kids would be kept clean, and they would be the ones used to go fetch the water to mix with the ashes of the red heifer. And they had to make sure that they stayed ceremonially clean. Now look at all the, I mean, it's almost over the top, isn't it? to make sure that all that, but God said, I demand holiness. You better be clean when you come into my presence. Even on something like this. So we are in, where are we at? The person must be cut off from Israel because the water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on him. He is unclean, and uncleanness remains on him. This is the law that applies to anyone, or applies when a person dies in a tent. Anyone who enters that tent and anyone who is in it will be unclean for 7 days. And every open container without a lid, everything inside that is unclean for 7 days. It has to be cleaned, ritually cleansed. For the unclean person, put some ashes from the burned purification offering into a jar and pour fresh water over them. Then a man who is ceremonially clean is to take some hyssop, dip it in water, sprinkle the tent, all the furnishings, and the people who were there. He must also sprinkle anyone who has touched a human bone or grave, or someone who has been killed, or someone who has died a natural death. The man who is clean is to sprinkle the unclean person on the 3rd and 7th days, and on the 7th day he is to purify him. The person being cleansed must wash his clothes and bathe with water, and that evening he will be clean. But if a person who is unclean does not purify himself, he must be cut off from the community because he has defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of cleansing has not been sprinkled on him, and he is unclean. This is a lasting ordinance. Last couple verses here. The man who sprinkles the water of cleansing must also wash his clothes. And anyone who touches the water of cleansing will be unclean till evening. Anything that an unclean person touches becomes unclean. And anyone who touches it becomes unclean till evening. There is death everywhere around them at this point. Everywhere. Bodies laying everywhere. Somebody's got to bury these people. Somebody's got to, some of these are loved ones. You got to bury them. But you're unclean. And everything in your house, in your tent, all that is unclean. So God made a way to make sure it was clean through this method, the red heifer sacrifice. Outside the camp, using hyssop, scarlet, and what else did I say? The wood. All is still pointing toward Christ. It is all pointing toward Christ. When you look at, and Paul, who I believe also wrote Hebrews, knew this when he wrote this in Hebrews chapter 9. He said, the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean, sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who is the eternal Spirit, offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. It was all a picture. This sacrifice is also a picture of Christ, and I told you that there's only been 9 in the whole history of the red heifer sacrifice. There's only been 9. So these ashes, they go for a long time. They would last easily anyone's lifetime. Easily anyone. I mean, you didn't sacrifice one and then 10 years later sacrifice another. It is a picture of that one sacrifice is good enough. Now, eventually, because it is man, it did run out. But symbolically, you look at it, and it's good enough. They didn't have to sacrifice over and over and over and over and over. The blood of the bull lasted. It worked. Just like with the Passover lamb where they had to keep doing it every year. Once Christ came on the scene and fulfilled all these sacrifices in one, it was enough. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 4. I think that's where I'm at. We'll start with 2. If it could, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worshipers would have been cleansed once for all, and they would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins, because it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then I said, Here I am. It is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, O God, O Lord. It is me. I am the one that does away with all this. And you say, what does this have to do with anything in mine and your future? It is, other than it is a picture of Christ's sacrifice, it is once for all. Because, doesn't it say in John, don't sin, but if you do sin, confess it. Basically, get it back under the blood. Nail it to the cross. Get it washed. All sins are paid for, and the price is there, and the price has been paid, but we still need to confess and ask for forgiveness of those things we do wrong, whether they're intentional or unintentional. Commission or omission, we still need to ask the forgiveness. The continual cleansing that He does for us. That is the picture of the red heifer. They could use it any time they came in contact with a dead body. Any time that they were defiled, because God said, do not defile my holy place. So what does all this have to do with your future and my future as a Christian? Can anybody tell me why is this important? Why even go through studying this? And that's Old Testament. Nobody does the red heifer anymore. It's what's the point? What's coming in the future? How do you know? Well, I'll tell you. How do you know that there's going to be a temple in the future? Biblically, how do you know?
Jesus said it would be. He said Matthew.
When what? What did He say would happen in that temple? The abomination of desolation. Before there can be that abomination, there has to be a place to do it. There has to be a place to do it. This is not going to be the temple of Ezekiel. The dimensions, everything is off for what's going. That will be one that Christ comes in and sets up to rule and reign His millennial kingdom in. But what else? How do you know there's going to be a temple? In Daniel 9, it talks about He comes in and He causes the oblation to cease. There's got to be a temple for the animal sacrifices to be happening for this man to stop them. It's gonna happen again. I don't know what environmental agency around the world will be all up in arms when this starts happening, because they do a lot of sacrificing. So what's that got to do with the red heifer? That's the first one there has to be. Go back to the red heifer. This thing, I have always taught and preached that no hairs could be any other color but red. I've read where even the hooves have to be red. Is that something that's... I don't know. The most that I saw was 2 hairs. If anything less than 2 hairs, you were good. Now, can you imagine combing through this animal and looking at every hair? I don't know if there's a computer program out there that can do it or not. Somebody's got to go through that process of finding these hairs. You could be looking at the one. What's weird about this one, it's in West Virginia. This picture is from February of 2017, so about a year and a half ago. The heifer has to be 3 years or older. Never a mark put on it. Now, what do most people do with their cows? Brand them, tag them, something. Every calf in the bunch, what do you call a bunch of calves? Herd. Well, not a herd, that's cows. That's the whole thing. But I don't guess there's a litter. They only have one, don't they? Okay. Sometimes they have twins. Anyway, every calf that was there with it had a tag in its ear, but this one. Don't really know why. The guy never said, but he noticed it. And he searched all through West Virginia. There must not be many Jews in West Virginia, because he said he couldn't find a rabbi anywhere around about to come in and verify if this could be it. But as far as I know, he is still in the process of trying to see if this could be the one. Now, the reason that it's important is none of what God says is going to happen, as far as the temple being rebuilt, the sacrifices happening, none of it can happen until a red heifer is killed and burned. Because all those priests, which are, the Sanhedrin has been reformed. It practices in the city of Tiberias. Over 500 new Levites are coming in, getting ready for temple practice, temple worship. Everything's in place. You got to have the red heifer, because every one of them, before they can set foot on the Temple Mount, has to be purified. And this is the only way. This is it. The Passover sacrifice doesn't do it. No other, the sin offering, the burnt offering, none of that does it except the red heifer. It is key. They got to be ready. The place has to be purified and sanctified, set apart. The people that go into the place to begin to minister and to begin the sacrifices have to be purified with the water of cleansing. None of what God says can happen will happen until this does. Now, whether by some miracle they do find the old ashes of the red heifer. I don't know how long ashes last in a sealed up, ceremonially clean place. But I can't imagine it's been, 1940 years, somewhere along in there? I can't imagine they're still there. People are on the lookout for the red heifer because they know that for temple worship, temple practices to begin again in the tribulation period, this has to happen. And this sets the stage for the building of the temple, the construction of the temple, and really the return of Christ. It's kind of one of those obscure things, and you think, oh, what is he talking about? I hope I've laid it out there for you. I mean, it goes deep into everything that they did. But I wanted you to see that Christ is in it. It was outside the camp with the wood, the scarlet, and the hyssop. It's a picture of it. It was for all. It was not for Jews. It was for Jews and everybody dwelling in and among it. God had a plan for it to move past the Jews the whole time. He knew it was going to extend to you and me. And that the purification would go on and on and on. The cleansing, the confessing of sin, and the shedding, of getting rid of sin in our lives over and over, it would happen. Not getting saved over and over, but once for all. Christ fulfilled this. Anybody got any thoughts or comments on this?
It's amazing to me. I'm so glad we're under grace.
Amen.
Oh, yeah.
Why anybody would want to say, let's go back to that and go back under the law, because there's no way in the world they can keep that.
And how good we have it under grace, under the age of grace and living in the age of grace. But they'll go back to this. They want it. They want to go back. And they will at some point. Somebody will come in and make it happen. And they'll go back to this. Oh, I mean, we couldn't do it.
Any significance to the red color?
What they were saying in all the commentaries and studies I read is red would signify blood.
Okay.
That's without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. That is what every commentary, every study, every author said. Outside of, there really was no other reason other than that it was to symbolize blood.
It has to be pure blood, no whites in it.
No nothing. I mean, how difficult that would be to find. 9 have been used from Moses until AD 70. 9. So they're rare, and they lasted a long time. The ashes lasted a long time. Some say, I will say this, that some say that there was a special place for some of the original ashes to be mixed with the new ashes. That they kept a certain portion of the original ashes from Moses' day, and that every time they would mix, they would take some of those ashes as well. I don't see any spiritual significance or anything in that. Maybe just tradition or something, but it's we hear all about the law, but just in that one thing, my goodness, it's great to be under grace. Anybody got anything else? But what we're doing, that bridge, you can go back if somebody wants to go. You saw the bridge, you don't have to go back. It's in line with that eastern gate, and that sets the stage for the building of the future temple. Because a lot of people get in an uproar and say it's right over the Dome of the Rock. But when you start looking at archaeology and the things that they have found, Probably not.
That's right.
Probably not. So, and I've got a great chart I found back there just a minute ago talking about the line of sight. That priest had to look into the Holy of Holies. It was a very important piece to that. So, whenever we get back up here, we'll talk about getting ready to build the next temple. What's already ready, what's being set up. I have seen with my own eyes the menorah that will be used in the third temple. I've seen it's in a glass case over there. Just sitting there as you go and look at the eastern wall. It's in the Jewish quarter. You look at the western wall. You look at the western wall, and right here is the menorah that will be used. It's huge.
What's menorah?
It's the 7 candlestick.
What is the purpose of that replica you said was in Arizona? Is it,
You know, the only thing that I've ever found is that it is in Arizona.
so it's not a place you can go visit and just see what?
It may be, but that's the only thing I could ever find on it. That's the only picture that I've ever found of it. And I've been looking at this stuff for years.
So
But
it's not a celebrated place where a lot of people go?
don't know.
It's just strange that they would have it out there if it was not a tourist destination or something.
Maybe.
Field trip.
Yeah,
Field trip.
get the bus ready.
Back up the bus.
But you never see that. You never see the bridge added in any of the models or anything. And just, I don't know if I explained. Oh, I told you about the air. That's why they use the arches, because the contamination couldn't travel through straight up to the priest. There was enough air in between them with the arches. As they walked across the bridge, all the dead bodies down here couldn't. I mean, Jerusalem was. I mean, they were at war all the time.
So what we're saying is that Jesus Christ fulfilled every bit of that,
Every bit.
every little detail of all of that when he went to that cross.
And that's just one.
Thank God.
He was also the Passover sacrifice. Happened to the second of when the Passover lamb was offered. In the location, everything. For all that to come together, how could you think that somebody made all this up?
Yeah.
Or wrote all this in hindsight? You look at, I don't know, J.R.R. Tolkien. Anybody know who that is, Tolkien? He wrote all the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbitses and all that. And they've gone back all these years later and found He created this world, this fictional world. And as they go back and they read the books he wrote, they find contradictions that in a world he created. So even in a world that a man created, there's still contradictions in things, but not here. You can't find one. And there's a great website, if you want it, come find me later, that talks about contradictions and explains them in every book of the Bible. It's pretty good. Anybody got anything else?
What's that website?
See me later.
In other words, you don't know, right?
I don't have it right off the top of my head, but I got it on my phone. Anybody? Hope I didn't bore you too bad. Hope you come back again. Just setting the stage for the building of the temple and moving forward with that. But this is important, and you'll see why, because this determines everything. So this was kind of the bridge between those two lessons. Okay. Anybody? Everybody good? All right. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this day that you've given us once again. We thank you for the weather, the safe travels, all that you do for us. And Lord, tonight we thank you most of all for grace, just that your blood was enough, that your sacrifice was enough, and that you work in us, your Holy Spirit works in us and wants to do things through us that matter in the kingdom, Lord. And we don't have to worry about blood of goats and bullocks and sacrifices and ashes. That, Lord, it's just you. Help us to focus on you, Lord, and be all that we can be for you. Lord, I thank you for the message this morning and how we can be more than what we are right now. And we can ask you to work through us, and you will. We can be whatever you have for us to be if we just sit back and say, yes, Lord, and really mean, Lord. I thank you for all that the Bible teaches us. I thank you for information that's out there that we can go and learn and see Christ in all the Old Testament and know that he fulfilled it all. He is true. He is real. And, Lord, he is in us. And I pray, Lord, that if he's not in someone here tonight, that they don't leave before they've accepted you. whoever sees this down the road, that they see that all this makes sense.
Yes.
Help them to see that it makes sense and to come to a realization of you. Ask you to be with us as we leave this place, all the traveling mercies, all the prayer requests, all the surgeries, all that's going on. Lord, help us to keep our eyes on you. Ask and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Ooh, timed that good.